This?
It's amazing the things we learn. Are you sure? Bravo. Vicky says we're opening the door meeting too. Good morning. Did you get the greetings?
To give an interview to this one.
Okay. I don't know if she remembers that, but want to...
Okay. Can I bring my crew?
Can we come in?
Oh, no.
Come on, we read about you.
I mean, it may be me if nobody else will do it, and if the money is there, why I'm willing to do it. I have a 14-year-old son, so I'd have to move here with him. There are other people. Mickey Raymond in Frankfurt is a possibility.
But how are you going about looking for people? I mean, you're just making contacts and asking if people are interested, or?
That's right. It has to be someone who can handle money and has at least German down, if not Czech.
I see.
And the startup phase will be fairly shaky because we don't know exactly what kind of problems are going to meet here. But I can't remember what the handout
No one ever
says.
does, believe me. Even if you think you do, it's hard. Well, that's good. So when would this be like a training period? I mean, as of December '92, then you plan to have that person up and going and having the context to get the space. And
right, and then run it for a year and see if it can sustain itself. How much money has to be raised from donation? How much has to be raised some other way? We have good contacts in Germany and England for bringing house bands. So potentially we would run the bottom floor as some kind of a club, or you know, there are a number of different angles that could be worked. We could end up booking bands for other clubs as long as we had a piece of the action. See, basically the notion is that something called the Bohemian Institute of Prague is going to have an immense amount of cachet in the United States. And if there's going to be some kind of expatriate decade here, then an institution like that is as logical as Prognosis. When I was here 2 years ago, I said, you know, what this town needs is an English weekly. And within 3 months, you know, I read that you guys were up and running. So to give people an expatriate community a focus, the Bohemian Institute would be created here. The English freaks, the German freaks, the American freaks would all be foreigners here. So it's like neutral territory. And it's a real filter. By locating it here, I think we would get rid of some of the hangers-on that would tend to appear if it were in Hollywood or London,
When you say hangers-on, a lot of people accuse the expatriate community here as being just that, or in seeking out like a second chance city. These sort of accusations come about by starting this sort of establishment here. Are you maybe making it a little bit more legitimate? Saying that we might actually have something to contribute to the community we're all living in, more so than just trying to run away from the problems in America?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that our analysis of the problems in America is that they need a thorough dose of pre-30 years occult spiritual idealism. Well, that means Bohemia. That's what it's always meant. Mm-hmm. So an expatriate community here, people here may think of it entirely in its impact on Prague, but the idea is that it have an impact on American society. If American politics is going to push itself over into some kind of super right-wing situation, then any liberal, open-ended criticism of American society is going to have to come from the outside. The situation is very analogous to the 20s in Paris. All those people were in Paris not because they loved Paris, but because they loathed the Harding administration and republicanism and the bourgeois leveling of values that was taking place in the States.
Do you see the quality of work that's coming out of Prague and maybe the rest of Czechoslovakia as well as meeting the level of what was coming out of the Paris of the 20s, the kind of painting, the kind of writing, the kind of excitement, or do you see it as maybe...
It's too early. In other words, in Paris, the Surrealist Manifesto wasn't until 23. I think that the next 2 or 3 years will tell. I think that the crack up of this country is going to be ultimately viewed in Bohemia as a very fine thing. That what is happening is the eastern part of the country, by taking itself out of the picture, is basically giving complete permission for the integration of Bohemia into Western Europe. Bohemia will move much faster in stabilizing itself with the country in two pieces, and I'm sure the people who are nostalgic for Czechoslovakia don't care for that, but I think worldwide what's happening is a kind of fragmentation. The Danish resistance to Maastricht means it's all fine when these grand federal unions are planned by parliaments and diplomats, but when you ask the people, nobody's interested. Do you think the quality of Prague right now is comparable to anything happening in Paris in the 20s?
Personally, I don't. But I've only been here for 6 months.
So we don't yet have a Stein, a Hemingway, a Faulkner, a Joyce, a Picasso.
An established one, no. But
Right.
I'm not saying there isn't a nascent one. No
Well,
one.
they're here somewhere,
Yeah.
selling sandwiches on the square or something. But in time, and I would hope that this institute we're talking about would be a focus for them.
Sort of a nurturing place where they can get together and
sort
have
of what
the
Shakespeare
coffee
books
house.
was to
Yeah.
Paris. Provide a focus.
I see. I was speaking with someone else who said that you have the botanical gardens in Hawaii.
Right.
Do you have another institute in Northern California, or are you establishing one there?
For this, you mean?
Well, that's why I asked, because I want to know if there is one established there, if this is how it is in contrast or similar to that one, but I don't know the status
Well,
of the
see,
one
it's a somewhat complex technical problem. A nonprofit foundation, you probably know this, is called a 501c3 in California. What we are trying to find out is if an institute run in Prague can be an American nonprofit foundation. It may be, now the reason we want nonprofit status is to be able to give people who contribute money a tax break. But often the level of patronage that we're dealing with, people don't even care about that. In other words, we're not going to do this with $50 donations.
Right.
Somebody is going to give us 25 grand or
Right.
something, and probably they will not be that concerned about getting their tax break. It would be good for us to establish it as a non-profit in order that the paying of the employees, then there are tax considerations there, see.
So there isn't a Bohemian Institute set up in San Francisco yet?
No.
But if it were to establish itself here, there would be an office there.
There would be an
it's
office.
a parallel venture, in other
Yes,
words.
it would
wouldn't be-
probably be this office on the back side.
Aha.
Oh, you missed
Okay.
the back side.
I missed the back side. Okay. I see. Maybe you could speak with me a little bit about the archaic revival that comes up in a lot of your stuff.
Well,
and
yeah, that's
how
part
it
of it.
applies to this. Maybe.
I mean, what's happening in the States is that the values of scientific industrialism developed out of, you know, the Renaissance and classicism and all that. It just is, it's played out, it's finished. And an archaic revival means going back into time to the last sane moment that you ever knew, and then, you know, attempting to establish whatever was going on in that moment, to reestablish it in your life now. The last sane moment that Europe, and by implication American culture, ever knew was the eve of the 30 Years' War. Out of the 30 Years' War came the modern industrial state, the modern parliamentary state, and the rise of modern science. And in all cases, Bohemia stood for something else. And a humanizing of science is part of the key to, you know, getting the world back on track. So by returning to Bohemia, where this was by first Rudolph II and later by the Winter King and Queen, brought to some kind of perfection, it seems like you know, a fitting place to have another go at this.
When did the idea strike you? I mean, when were you in San Francisco and you were thinking about the archaic revival and you said, I, Terence, I must go there. I must go and be a part of this. When did that happen?
Well, strangely enough, it was a year and a half before I ever got to Prague. The first time I came to Prague, because I read about the city, knew that it had not been touched in World War I or World War II, was familiar with some of the photographers who've worked here, and just said, you know, this will be the place. I know it. And people said, well, but my God, you've never even been there. Don't you think you ought to go and look? So 3 years ago, after going to a conference in Linz, I came here with Woody and Stena Vasulka, who are Czech and who are video artists. And Woody and I sat down on the square and talked about it, and it seemed to make sense. And then I went to Germany and told people about it and discussed it in England, and everywhere I went, people said, this will work. Bohemia, Prague, the new freedom in Europe, the rising beige fascism in America, the mix is perfect. And this is now my second trip to Prague, and it seems more and more like we don't have to push this project. It has a natural momentum of its own. It wants to happen, and it doesn't want to be in Venice or Berlin or Barcelona. It wants to be here.
That's good. Okay. You say 3 years ago. Was that immediately after the revolution that you came?
Yes.
Okay. Was that sort of like your calling, or did you feel that that your thoughts are somehow prescient, that like, aha, this is the sign, this is my breakthrough.
Well, I knew no Czechs, I had no way to get to Prague, and then came the free invitation to fly to Linz, and then I met Woody and Stena, and he was Czech, and he said, we've got a van, we're going to Prague for 5 days, would you like to come along?
Wow.
So I said, of course, this is what I've been dreaming.
A little bit about your networking from when you met Woody. How have you gone about meeting the Bohemian artists here, to talking about your project, to really feeling the momentum pushing you along and that you weren't pulling the project?
Well, Woody
anymore?
was a graduate of FAMU, and so he knew a lot of people there. And I don't know what the situation is in this town now, but at that time, FAMU had gone from making 70 pictures the last year before the revolution to making 5 pictures the next year. So they were frantic to get money. And at first we envisioned this as maybe a liaison with FAMU, where we would get. Anyway, it wasn't clear how it would work. But then it was clear that FAMU is going through so much upheaval, and Josef Petzak, apparently there was some criminal unhappiness, or somebody ran off with a bunch of money. You probably know more about it than I do. So it was decided to not link it to FAMU. And then it's become simply this freestanding kind of thing since then.
So with the people that you've met, they just exponentially, you met more people through them, and you've been going out
and meeting people and talking
sort of
with
freebasing.
them. Yeah, and it's not only artists, it's also, there was a lot of what in the West would be called eccentric science being done here, because this pre-rational psychology never really died out here. It can't. It's in the air and the water. I mean, it's what Bohemia really is all about. Have you read, for example, Francis Yates' book, The Rosicrucian Enlightenment?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's the occult history of Bohemia and of Bohemian Europe, and very interesting stuff. I mean, this is the place from which all of these magical ideas were being generated and perfected throughout the 16th century and into the 17th, right up to the 30 Years' War, which was in 1619.
And all of that, I haven't read the book, but with that sort of imagery going on, and now there's tremendous uncertainty, I mean, in the country, and it might split, and there might be an exodus from Slovakia. Everything is sort of up for grabs. I mean, do you think that imagery might change? That it might, if it does hit a point of economic disparity and everyone gets really depressed, that it might lose that? Or do you think it can't be touched? That it's so magic and has so much.
I think if it could survive communism, what could an economic recession do to it? I mean, for crying out loud.
I see. The untouchable. Okay. How would you said you might, if this really gets going, or you might have to manage it, how would you feel about moving to Czechoslovakia with your son?
I would. My only concern is that my son be all right with it. He loves the girls and the clubs and the scene. He's a little uncertain about the language, but I would love to live here. I've lived at times in India and Jerusalem and South America, and I could live here and feel less foreign than I ever felt in those places.
Do you think that the American presence, if this really it's 1 year experiment, and if that goes very well, and investors are flocking to it, and people are staying up late into the evening talking and generating their ideas, as you might hope, there's some concern that with all these English language papers showing up in Turkey and Hungary and everywhere else, that we're sort of trying to take the best of what the world has to offer for ourselves. And it's sort of, I've heard from other people, it's sort of like an American egoism, you know, to come to all these places and just start up and to say, I like it. What is your response to those critics? Because I know it leaves us reeling sometimes. You know, we just want to explore, we want to live it. And
well, the implication is that you're edging somebody else out who is more appropriate. But who is it? Who is it? There's no money. Would the Germans be preferable? Would the Japanese be preferable? I think that the Czechs should see it as an extraordinary piece of good fortune in terms of the hard currency that flows in here. No one will stay who doesn't become partially Czech. So it's... And if what people are simply resisting is being cosmopolitan, well then what planet are they planning to move to? Because, you know, in Kathmandu there are discos, in Bali there's no escaping modern high-tech culture. And to call it American, you know, you go to Dresden in East Germany, the whole thing is being played out with no Americans involved. There it's West Germans being resented by East Germans. So I think that you always have a situation of those who are not moving forward, resenting and blaming those who are. But if you get into cultural stereotyping, it's a kind of racism or something. I mean, in other words, we do not represent IBM or General Motors. We don't even represent them when we're inside the States. So to talk about the American invasion, there's a corporate invasion, there's a youth invasion, and I think Czechs should feel very differently about these things.
Do you think they're developing along their own lines, or do you see it as sort of a period of stagnancy with this political and economic uncertainty? Do you feel
I think that there's a lot of thrashing around, and that it will continue until the country is actually, that this federal issue is settled. I think that a lot of people haven't thought beyond the breakup of the country. And once that's settled, and it appears to me that it's inevitable, then Bohemia will define itself, and Western Czechoslovakia will define itself differently.
Back to the Bohemian Institute. When would you like to see the doors open? What is your personal goal for this project?
Well, over the summer, I would hope that sometime in the fall the doors would open.
Here, this fall, 92?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that then it would be up and running by the middle of next year in all its areas of concern.
And you say you're looking, I want to say, is the biggest problem finding the actual place that would accommodate have nice walls for gallery space and nice place for a cafe? Is that the biggest problem?
And the biggest problem is also raising money.
Yeah, the money and the place.
We're in a funny situation now because we've just had conferences with a number of people who probably will give money, but they have to complete their European vacation, and I have to have meetings with them in California. And it's a pain in the neck to me because I would rather stay here and hassle through getting a space right now. But considering the kind of energy it has, I don't think it has to be pushed.
I see. When you say, one last thing, I noticed the gallery, all this kind of stuff, would it just be for American artists, or would it just be for any capable artists who came in that had something interesting? Try and put
No, I think Czech artists
would
would be at the top of the list. The idea would be to show Czech artists, to get them in front of galleries in the West, and to bring artists here to give them exposure in the East.
Somewhat of a springboard idea to just...
Right. It's an educational institute. It's to educate people going both ways.
What have you thought of the Czech art you've seen so far?
It falls into two categories. Technically competent, but not very interesting, and world-class experimental stuff that can stand on its own, that tends to be in the surreal or mannerist category.
What medium in particular you say the world-class experimental stuff? I mean, is it glass or paintings? Painting specifically. You mentioned that the technical skill is often very apparent. That they seem to be saying that the Czech artists, and not all of them because generalities are wrong, but that their big focus is trying to be technical and trying to be accepted. Do you see that as something that, when you talk about your educational institute, that you're going to try and sort of hammer away a barrier of sorts as to how they think and perceive?
Well,
how they go about
I think
art,
they've been
the freedom.
operating in a vacuum, away from the influence of anything else. And once this ends, I imagine they will enter the stream of world art.
Okay, perfect, we're done.
Good.